I'm loath to say that the function of science is the discovery of metaphors for subsequent development in the arts, but that's one way in which I interact with science.
We're from New Scientists, so let's start talking about science. Tell me what it means to you.
I find it absolutely fascinating, and I always have done. As a small boy, I remember being given a book about all kinds of scientific things. There were diagrams of jet engines and catalytic converters and all sorts of stuff, which I read thrilled by all these revelatory things. When I was doing the scientific bits in his Dark Materials, and then later in the Book of Dust, my concern was not to pass an exam, because of course I'm writing a novel. It is a great source of metaphors. I found dark matter a very helpful metaphor. And I had my fingers crossed since 1993, when I started writing Dark Materials, that they wouldn't discover what it was before I finished. And they still haven't, so I reckon that was quite safe. But I become very interested in the subject of fields. And the Higgs field was what really alerted me to this aspect of nature, reading about the Higgs field and how the Higgs boson is a kind of expression of that field. You know, something permeating the whole universe. There's no such thing as empty space.
So you did mention that in one of the earlier books. It's the Rusakov field,
that's
right?
Yeah.
So that's
the Rusakov. Well, yes, that was my
field,
dust. You see, the dust is the particles, the Rusakov particles. That also was something I found a useful way of thinking about consciousness. Consciousness is something that's extraordinarily interesting and important. You know, they can find the bit that lights up when you feel hungry or you're frightened, but that isn't the same as being hungry or frightened. This is the hard problem, and it's a very intriguing one. A man called Philip Goff wrote a very good book recently called Galileo's Error. The error being the insistence on things that are measurable as against things that aren't measurable, so excluding a lot of experience from the field of science.
As a philosophical question, it's great. You can really go to town on it, but if you want to do science on it, it becomes really tricky, because that doesn't give us anything experimental to work on.
No, it doesn't, and this is, I think, Philip Goff's point. Since Galileo, the approach of science has been a mathematical one. You know, you measure things, you've got a quantity that's measurable, you measure it, and that's part of what you do. But it can't deal with qualities, it can't deal with experiences. It's like trying to measure the temperature of the sugar in your saucepan with a telescope. It's the wrong equipment, it's the wrong thing. How do you explain nostalgia, for example? How would you build nostalgia into an artificial intelligence?
You could make it weigh memories, experiences it had had differently, and add more value to them in its algorithm, and that would be a sort of artificial nostalgia.
And would that be like Proust?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
That is the question, yeah. I think a lot of the things that science is either dubious about or sceptical about or refuses to have anything to do with are these qualities which are so well expressed in terms of literature or music, poetry or the visual arts. Those are the tools with which we examine this kind of stuff. If Goff is right about Galileo's division between things you can measure, which are scientific, and things you can't measure, which aren't. If he's right about that, then science is incapable of talking about a huge range of human experience. And the sort of gung-ho triumphalist proponents of science would say, no, that's because we haven't got there yet, we'll measure it, we'll do it one day. I'd say, well, you won't, because it's just not measurable.
Well, perhaps I am being gung-ho scientist, but I feel that we will be able to get there eventually. I don't want to say,
I'd point
throw up
out,
my arms.
We've got there already. And you read it in Shelley and Keats and Shakespeare. You hear it in Debussy and Stravinsky. The world of the Secret Commonwealth, which is the world of ghosts and shadows and illusions and dreams and fantasies and so on, is real. It's there. I live in it. That's where I spend much of my time. But I couldn't measure it. I couldn't weigh it. But I'm certainly not going to deny it because I can't read it, I can't weigh it or measure it.
the quote from Blake at the beginning of Secret Commonwealth.
Yes.
Everything possible to be believed is an image of the truth. Can you talk about that a bit?
Man has no body distinct from his soul, for body is that portion of soul discerned by the five senses. I like that way of thinking. I like that way of that inclusiveness. Let me show you a world where every particle of dust is alive with joy. These people are saying something that is as true as E equals mc squared, but it's has to be expressed in different terms. That seems to me a highly joyful, a highly encouraging and healthy and all-round good way to look at the world.
When your imagination is in full flight, how does that feel? Where's it coming from?
I don't know where it comes from, but I know where it comes to. I've made this point elsewhere. It comes to my desk. If I'm not there, it goes away again. But you can't rely on inspiration. Habit has written far more books than inspiration has. And equally, you shouldn't despair if you can't think of anything.
But you've spoken of discovering your stuff rather than inventing it.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
The sense I have sometimes, not always, because I write in many different states of mind. But when I do discover that, if a new character comes into the story, it is as if I have discovered them and not as if I had made them up. And it's pleasing when that happens, because as Raymond Chandler said, when in doubt, have a man come through the door with a gun. And if someone comes through the door with a gun, whether it's a bear wearing armour or a little girl with a message, whatever it is, it's great. And it does feel as if it happens and I'm not making it up.
And you mentioned David Deutsch before, and the stuff he's working on is the most extraordinary,
It's constructor theory, that's what he calls it.
That's right. I mean, it's based in hard equations, but where he takes it, and the same with the many worlds hypothesis, which you've got in the subtle knife. And
Science is clearly a field where the imagination can be triumphant. If you work hard at it every day, the ideas are more likely to come to you. You'll be more likely to see connections between them. But probably it's a temperamental thing as well. You've got to have a bit of a gift for seeing resemblances between things, making analogies, hearing echoes and correspondences. Clearly Deutsch is one of those people, as was Einstein, of course, because the famous thought experiment riding on a beam of light. That takes a kind of visual imagination, and it obviously worked very well for him. At the very highest levels, there's probably not much difference. There's also the question, though, of the material that you're using. Taking Debussy as an example, he was particularly sensitive to harmonies. Monet was particularly alive to the effects of light on colour, and fascinated by the way it's modulated by clouds, reflected from water, the effects that has. That was his material, it was light. Einstein, I believe, was not terribly at home with mathematics. He found maths rather difficult, but he was obviously very good at visualising the physical properties of things and seeing deeply into the nature of them.
I mentioned to everyone I know that I was coming here to talk to you. A couple of people said, one friend who's a Christian said he enjoyed his dark materials very much when he was a child, but he found them very unsettling to his beliefs.
Yeah.
And another friend who's an atheist said he also was unsettled by them for the opposite reason, because he was worried that it would make people think there was such a thing as the soul, and that's very unscientific, and we can't have that. So it was interesting they had it both ways. What was your intention?
It's pointless to ask a writer what their intention was, because A, they don't know, B, they'll tell you a story about it anyway, C, whatever it is, it'll be to their credit when they tell you. Clearly it matters. It matters to people. That very question matters to people. I had a lot of letters saying, especially after the first two books, but before the third one was out, Who's good? Who's bad? Who should I cheer for? Who's the villain? I don't understand what's happening. And my answer was always, well, wait till the story's over and then make your own judgment. I'm not going to judge it for you. I'm extremely interested in religion, always have been. I don't believe in a God. But the questions that religion poses and tries to answer are the important questions about human life. Where do we come from? Is there a purpose in our living? How can we be good? Do we have to be good? What happens if we're evil? Those are big, important questions. A story will help us make sense of anything. But a story is a story. You don't have to believe everything in the story to find it satisfying.
Is this what Lyra and Pan are getting at the end of the Amber Spyglass when they say we need to build a republic of heaven?
Yeah.
So we need a new way of thinking about the world
Yes.
and the big questions.
William Blake again. I must create my own system or be enslaved by another man's. That raises questions too. Do we need a system to live by? Can we build our own system? We have a system, most of us, but it's a ragbag of different things. Memories, superstitions, inclinations, things we worked out for ourselves, things we bought wholesale from the nearest church. So we all do have a sort of system, a sort of way of, a thing that helps us to live in a meaningful way. And I think what Lyra and Pan were agreeing at the end of the Amber Spyglass is that we need to do that for ourselves. And we need to do it where we are, not somewhere else. And poor Lyra's discovering in the Book of Dust that it's not as easy as she thought.
Did the authority create demons, or did they evolve?
The question I have more often than any other is, how do demons get born? And I always say, well, you know, you don't have to think about it. If you want to think about it, you're welcome to come up with any answer you like, but I'm not going to answer it for you because it's a metaphor. It's not a real thing. It's just a way of thinking about the relationship between one's body and one's mind, I suppose. But it isn't quite that, because you've got your mind and you can think about the demon. And the demon is part of you and can blah, 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 etc., etc. But anyway, the demon I found to be an extremely useful metaphor for human psychology. I'm finding it, or I found it in the Secret Commonwealth, to be a very good analogy for depression. It's a very tight, neat, easily graspable way of picturing something that isn't easily picturable otherwise.
The thing that shocked me most about in the Secret Commonwealth actually was it's not so much that Pan and Lyra go their separate ways, which is an awful thing for us to read, but when we get to the bit where there's those two philosophers who deny that demons exist, and I found that shocking. Perhaps that is what you're saying, in that some people in our world deny aspects of consciousness.
Yes.
So then I didn't find it so shocking. I almost rooted for those guys, actually.
Yes, they're quite different. Talbot is a kind of postmodernist who believes
Stylist. It's it's not.
Yes, it's all froth. It's
all
it's all performance. The other one, the German philosopher, is well, I sort of thought of him rather like Ayn Rand, who exerted a huge influence on, well, various individuals and latterly on politics, economics, by means of a novel, and was utterly mad.
What I liked about them in the end was this boldness of challenging the idea of consciousness.
Yes.
And,
but we could only come to it at that stage in the story. That would have been out of place in his Dark Materials. It's now that Lyra's grown up and able to see and understand and think about these things, that there was a place for them.
let's talk about environmental issues. They're mentioned a bit, I think, in The Subtle Knife. Like Will mentions some weirdness happening in his world, and then in La Belle Sauvage, there's the floods, of course. How do you think we should tackle the climate crisis in fiction?
It is already and is going to be even more of an extraordinary change in human life. We have got to do something about it. We've got to stop pumping exhaust fumes into the atmosphere, as we've been doing for 250 years No. It's utterly baffling how politicians, presumably informed and intelligent men and women, just seem to treat us as if it doesn't matter. The human race is enormously ingenious and enormously stupid at the same time.
Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for having us in your home.
It's been a great pleasure. I love talking about science because I know so little about it.
Well, I don't know anything about all the other things you've been talking about, so it's a good marriage.
Good, excellent.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Cheers.
you.